Hi! In this video we're going to take a look at the last little bit of functionality that we have to define parameters for functions. So let's take a look at this kwargs, which really stands for keyword arguments. So just recall that *args is used to scoop up a variable amount of remaining positional arguments. So you can define specific positional arguments, and then you can scoop up any additional ones that the user may provide when they call the function by using *args. Now, of course, this returns a tuple. It's going to be, stored inside a tuple, and args, the name itself, is arbitrary, right? The real star here, the real performer, is star, okay? Now, *kwargs is kind of the same thing. It's used to scoop up a variable amount of remaining keyword arguments. So the single star scoops up the positional arguments, and the double star scoops up the keyword arguments. And it will be stored in a dictionary under the name of whatever variable name you use here. It is customary to use kwargs for keyword args, but again, you can change that depending on the context you're in. It may make more sense to call it something else. So again, the parameter name is arbitrary. The real performer here, the real star, is the double star. So the thing is that the double star can be specified even if the positional arguments have not been exhausted, right? Which is unlike the keyword only arguments that we saw in the last lecture, where you first had to exhaust your positional arguments before you could start essentially defining keyword only arguments. With ***, you can actually put that even if you haven't defined anything that exhausts the positional arguments, like a star or a *args, for example. And the only other thing too is that no parameters can come after the **kwargs. Kind of makes sense because, well, the named arguments, the keyword only arguments, have to come last, and this scoops up anything that wasn't actually specifically defined as a keyword only argument. So therefore, you can't have other arguments after that. That's kind of the end of the line. So let's look at an example that will be easier to understand. So we can define this function this way, right? So we have the star here. Basically, remember what this does. It basically says we don't have any positional arguments in this method because we don't have any defined before the star, and star essentially indicates the end of positional arguments. Then we have a keyword only argument called d, which is mandatory because it has no default value. And then we scoop up any remaining ones that may be present when the function is called in the arguments. So we can call it this way. We can say func d equals 1, well, we need to put d equals 1. And then we have a equals 2 and b equals 3. Now the order of those, as usual with keyword arguments, doesn't matter. And in this case, what we'll get is that d will be equal to 1, and then this parameter here, kwargs, is going to have these remaining two keyword arguments in a dictionary, where the key of the dictionary will be the key, right, of the keyword argument, and the value will be the value that you provided. Hence the name keyword argument. And then func d equals 1, you can do that as well, since again, the ** doesn't mandate that additional keyword arguments have to be present, only that they can be present, and then it will just scoop them up. So in this case, we'll get d equals 1, and kwargs will just be an empty dictionary. So let's look at another example. Of course, we don't even have to specify anything before the ***. As I mentioned in the first slide, you don't have to exhaust all your positional parameters before putting that in. Python will automatically understand that, okay, from this point forward, I'm only looking for keyword arguments. So you can call the function this way, in which case kwargs will just be that dictionary with those key value pairs in them. You can call func without anything, in which case the kwargs will just be an empty dictionary. You could also do this. You can say *args, ***kwargs. And so what that's going to do, it's going to collect all the positional arguments into a tuple and all the keyword arguments into a dictionary. So here, if we call it this way, then args will be the tuple containing 1 and 2, and kwargs will be the dictionary containing the key value pairs for A and B. We can also, of course, again, call it with no parameters at all, no arguments at all, since each one of those doesn't mandate a positional or a keyword argument. And so here we would end up with an empty tuple for args and an empty dictionary for kw args. So let's take a quick look at some code to see this in action. So let's start by looking at the kwargs functionality. So we can just define it this way. Now again, this doesn't have to be called kw args. That's the general way that we name it, but it's just a convention. You can use something else if it makes more sense in your context. So I'll use, for example, C in this case. You probably wouldn't want to use something like args, by the way, because that's going to be confusing to people, because usually they're expecting star args, not star args. So at the very least, don't use that. Use something else if you want to, like maybe others, right? We can call it star others. And we're just going to print it out. So we'll print the variable out. And now you can call this function with as many keyword arguments as you want. So a equals 1, b equals 2, c equals 3, whatever you want. And then you'll get that others will become a dictionary with the key value pairs being the key and the value of your keyword arguments. So pretty straightforward. Now if you want, you can of course combine the double star with the star as well. So we can do something like this. Def func and star args, star kwargs. And here we'll print args and we'll print kwargs. So by doing this, well, here what we're saying is that we have an arbitrary number of positional arguments, and here we have keyword only arguments, an arbitrary number of them as well. So we can call it this way. We could say 1, 2, as many as we want, and then at some point we can switch over to keyword arguments. So we might say x equals 100, y equals 200. Now you cannot at this point revert now back to positional arguments, right? If you try and do this, you'll just get an error that tells you that the positional argument follows a keyword argument. That's not allowed. So you have to specify your positional arguments first, exhaust them, and then move on to your keyword arguments. So when we do that, you'll see that 1 and 2 went into the args tuple, and x and y went into the kwargs dictionary. So pretty straightforward. Now, of course, if you want, you don't have to use star args, you can use actual positional. So we can say, let's say a and b are two positional parameters. And let's say now you want to collect your keyword arguments using a star. Now remember when we were doing the section on star args, then if you wanted to name a keyword only argument, you had to use a star to indicate that this is the end of the line for positional arguments. Now with star, let's say I want to do this. This is actually not going to work because this already basically says, hey, there are no more positional arguments after this point, because that's already known, right? Once we start using keyword only arguments, then all the positional arguments are no longer, allowed after that point. So if we try and do something like this, I'll show you what happens. So we'll just print all the variables out. We get this, that named arguments must follow a bare star. So the only time you would want to use this is if you want to have a specific named keyword argument in that position. So that will work just fine, because now you can call the function saying 1, 2, d is going to be equal to maybe 20, and then x will be 100 and y will be 200. That will be the additional ones. Also, the order of this doesn't matter, right? If we want, we can specify d over here. That's perfectly fine. And so we end up with a equal to 1, b equal to 2, and then the dictionary, and of course we didn't print d, but the dictionary contains x and y. So let's go ahead and print d, rerun that, and there we go, d is 20, okay? So if you want to have only star kwargs, but no named keyword only arguments, then you could do this, right? So a comma b, so we'll start with our positional arguments, and then we just directly write star kwargs. We'll print a, we'll print b, and then we'll print kwargs. Okay, and so now you can call the function, let's say 1, 2, and then x equals 100, y equals 200, and when we execute that, we get as expected, a is 1, b is 2, and then kwargs as a dictionary contain the x and y keyword pairs. Okay, There's other things that you can do to kind of, play around with the star args, the star-star kwargs, and we'll get into that into the next video when we'll look at putting everything together, and we'll kind of recap everything we've seen so far. But again, I urge you to just play around, define, simple functions like this where you just print out the parameters, print out the values, I should say, that you get in those parameters in the function, and see what you can or can't do and how it kind of works. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.